Hey everybody, I'm Nick Kolakowski, the host of Tech Connects, where we dig into all aspects of the tech industry and tech recruiting that matter to you. Happy 2025. For our latest episode, we're talking to Brandon Jeffs, who's the Director of People and Talent at TLDR, a newsletter collective with more than 5 million readers that covers startups, coding, tech, and much more. He's been a senior recruiter and talent partner at numerous firms, including the fintech unicorn Caribou, Prospectus Labs, and much more. I wanted to chat with him about the current state of tech hiring, how recruiters can find effective talent, and understanding candidate motivations. So let's listen in. Now that we're firmly in 2025, one thing seems clear for technologists, for tech recruiters, for hirers, for every kind of involved in this crazy tech ecosystem, which is that things are kind of a little bit chaotic. There's people worried about the job implications of AI. There's continuing layoffs. There's all this seismic change in companies left and right. And given all that, I was curious. I really wanted to talk to you because you have such fantastic insight. But what sort of mindset do you think recruiters need to take as they plot out their strategies over the next 12 months, if such a thing is even possible, given kind of all the turbulence and everything else going on right now?
I think it really comes down to just being flexible and adaptable. I mean, that's what recruiting is all about anyway. We're a resilient group and we're always learning about new roles. There are always new emerging functions within the business. This comes in waves of all sizes at times. We're just in like deeper swells. So surf's up.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. As I've been talking to recruiters and hiring managers, as well as people who are just tech managers and aren't necessarily involved in the hiring process, one thing that is coming up again and again is a sort of like obviously the pressure to hire the right people, and that never goes away. But then there's a lot of questioning people have been doing over kind of automating various aspects of the hiring process, whether that means automating like kind of screening tasks like testing, or trying to build a script that will allow you to sort through resumes or things like that. And it seems that one of the things that pops up again and again, I've heard this over and over, and I really want your take on it, is um, how can recruiters make sure that that human element remains present and prominent? I mean, there's all this pressure to automate, but recruiters realize that there needs to be the human element, or you're going to turn candidates off. And everyone seems to be struggling for that balance. I mean, how are you looking at that?
It really comes down to the rec ops for the role and the level. If it's, a technology role versus a go-to-market role, if it's entry level versus, principal level IC or an exec search, recruiting has always looked different depending on the level of the role. And this is actually where technology has seen candidate-driven advancements in the past. And I always point that candidates typically drive seismic changes within our rec ops stack. For example, 10 years ago, one way video interviewing was a new emerging way to reach a higher volume of candidates in CSM or SDR roles. People are like, oh, candidates aren't going to do this. But they did. And it was a way for them to articulate pre-recorded interview screening questions, uh, get a chance to really hone their pitch and communicate with flexibility asynchronously with a hiring manager or a recruiter. A lot of folks that have been around recruiting, we use these tools. And based on the market, which has ups and downs through supply and demand, candidates will tell you what they're going to use and what they're not going to use. So I don't see AI automation at the very top of the funnel being one of those things that drives folks away. Sometimes candidate processes are just forced hands on if they want to work for that company, that's the process. And if the candidate wants the job, they will do it. Um, Candidate experience is at the forefront of all of this. We've seen candidate experience evolve through automation and tools and technology since the beginning of time. An example in my experience is, you know, solving a digital transformation application workflow for a post IPO uh, retailer. And, we were using more legacy ATS systems, what I've called like the second wave of hiring tools. And we had to move more towards like the third wave of hiring tools. And what that looked like was how do we solve for mobile optimization for inbound applications for hourly workers that don't work at a desk? Um,
Interesting.
so we changed vendors. Vendors will build based on the complaints and pain points of their customers, and the customers will voice their concerns based on the candidates they can and cannot reach. So it's always slow moving in terms of massive industry changes. But ultimately, if we think about the candidates at the center of the process and we see more diversification from the vendor landscape, we'll have better candidate experiences and companies will be forced to compete for that talent by evolving their tools. But at the end of the day, it always comes down to how do you make a candidate feel about the hiring manager they'll work with and the company and the values they represent.
It's a fantastic answer. One thing that occurred to me when you were talking about vendor tools was this is sort of this infamous example of a few years back where Amazon um, attempted to create a resume screener, and unfortunately, it ended up, what I'm about to say, where it ended up excluding all the technologists who identified as women who were submitting their resumes in because it accidentally kind of machine learned in the wrong direction. People cite that kind of example again and again, but I'm also hearing that people are kind of quite pleased with, it doesn't even need that modifier, they are pleased with how a lot of these tools are evolving and how smart they're becoming. For people who are sort of tiptoeing into this, like how smart are the tools at this point for a lot of these processes? I mean, are they PhD level? Are they still grade school level? I mean, what are we talking here?
I'm not a technologist. I know enough to be dangerous around how it impacts people and recruiting process and the operations within a business. And I know what metrics executives and founders want to call on and what they want to look at from the demographic data that you alluded to. I've used that example as well, but that was at this point, that was what, like 2018, 2019, when they sunset that internal AI resume ranking and screening tools. So I think like the tools have gotten better. My talk track for that used to be like, well, if Amazon, the biggest company in the world with the most resources that can hire the best engineers, couldn't figure it out, what makes this, you know, person think that they're going to figure it out? I'm trying to be more curious these days instead of cynical. There are a lot of folks building, and I think that parallel epiphany and the advancement of more and more LLMs, like we saw this week, there's a new LLM that's going to rival 4OS. So I think it's a good space. Like venture capital will always be investing in a way to identify some sort of moat or arbitrage when it comes to technology and find that differentiator. And that's what's exciting about venture capital is they're looking for venture returns and you make these really big bets. But before I stop and pause, it's important to do that exactly, to
Yes.
stop and to
Yeah.
pause and have a balanced media diet. If you're only getting your information about LLMs and AI from vendors, like go out and do a little bit more research and also be able to poke holes, ask vendors tough questions, understand the tools that are giving compliance or regulatory certifications for their audits. Um, yeah, it's an interesting time, but yeah, at the end of the day, it's understanding, who are the people we are hiring? Is it representative of our society and of our customers? And what values does the company want to live? There's no one size fits all way to do things or hire. There's no recruiting jail. There's no recruiting emergency room. It really just comes down to, I think, in this market, in this change in 2025, aligning yourself as a recruiter with the type of founder and company that shares your values.
That's critical. One thing that we've been finding as we've been doing sort of successive surveys and reports, including the new Dice Tech Salary Report which just came out, is that um, when it comes to things like culture, and values that a company holds. If you're in alignment, if the tech pro or the technologist who's being hired is in alignment with the company's values and policies and so on, in a way that I guess they would feel viscerally or emotionally, whatever term you want to throw in there, then they're willing to come in at a lower price point. They're willing to. I mean, it's so critical and important. Um, the cultural aspect of it, that I mean, you'll get tech pros on board easily. I imagine there's probably, kind of, they'll take a lower offer versus a company who doesn't align with what they want, that might be willing to pay them more. It seems like it's such a incredible advantage or an incredible tool, whatever term you want to throw in there. But a lot of companies, it seems, not a lot of companies do realize the value of culture, but not all of them. And it seems like there's a bunch of them that are still kind of waking up to the possibility of broadcasting that in a really effective way and having candidates attract to them as a result of that. One thing related to that, that I've been talking to people about, that I really am interested in exploring, is that there's a lot of pressure right now to hire specialized talent, whether that's your data scientists, whether that's your AI experts, whether that's your people who just have, particular skills in a certain tool. But not all companies, especially kind of given everything that's going on with the economy and so on, necessarily have the resources to hire those candidates, especially if they're competing for that specialized talent against, like, the Googles and, as you said, like the Amazons of the world, these massive companies that have infinite funding to basically kind of acquire anybody that they want. So I guess kind of the question becomes, if you're a recruiter or a hiring manager, building relationships with those specialized candidates in a way that allows them to stand out from those rivals who are competing for that talent. Sort of, what's the best way to go about that? I mean, just because you're sort of, it feels like on your back foot a little bit sometimes if you're trying to compete against Google for the same pool of AI talent or any talent that falls in that category.
There's a lot to unpack there,
Yeah. Sorry.
and
I realized that was a massive, like, mega question.
no,
Just
no,
a
in a good way, because when we unpack hiring and answer these, like, very large scale questions, we have to go upstream and go higher up in the funnel. So how do we do it? Um, Being authentic. I think everybody talks about authenticity, until it's time to show up. And I think, like, what we've seen, whether it is like rage bait or not, in the last few weeks, we've seen some great founder takes online talking about, like, oh, there's that one where it's like the founder talking about they worked 80-hour weeks and they want folks to work 80-hour weeks. I saw a job post last year where it was like we work Sunday through Friday in office 6 days a week in New York City. Um, I'm not mad about that. I mean, like, if you're 25 years old, like, you're doing something 80 hours a week anyway. Um, so when it comes to identifying how to compete for talent, it's really understanding what people want. Like, does somebody want to go to a Google and ship code 15 hours a week, and have catered lunches, or do they want to get heads down and ship 40 hours a week and spend another 20 hours a week working with the team? Um, I don't think there's anything as a 10x engineer, but I think there's like a 3x engineer. That's something that, a mentor of mine once talked to me about, and I believe that trope because we have to be honest and really understand what are the skills that are delivering value to the business at big tech. Like, I talk to software engineers in big tech that work on these, like, internal tools projects for 2 years just to test a thesis, and then it gets sunset. Like, they're not shipping anything that's tangible. Then I talk to founding principal engineers at startups or who've exited that become founders, have exits and go back through an accelerator and build relationships with, investors. And I think that type of relationship building really matters. But what's important is to understand the motivations of the engineer themselves and how there's fluidity throughout all of the other inputs in life in how we operate. Like, you could be an awesome engineer and maybe you want to go tuck in at a Google for a couple years and enjoy some parental leave and enjoy some of the lifestyle. Maybe there's a new office. Maybe comp is through the roof. I think some folks are in a position in their career where money isn't everything. And that's what I've heard in my own experience in the last few years, where I've talked to folks out of Google that are like, "Hey, yeah, I work at Google. It's great, but I'm not really fired up. I'm not really working on anything. I got 10 or 12 hours to fill. Like, is there any like fractional project you can connect me with that I could get to work on and build something?" Think at the end of the day, like if you're an engineer, if you're a technologist, you like to build. But there are also 10 other sectors of the S&P that are not technology focused. And all of those companies require software engineers. So like there's just far too vast a market. And it really just comes down to how do you represent the job? How do you represent the opportunity and the individualized employee value proposition? And the way I approach that is by talking to a lot of candidates. I'm always sourcing, I'm always connecting. And as a professional dot connector, that's what gives me energy is like, oh, hey, I talked to this like venture studio over here, and this investor looks to do X. Who are the 5 highest leverage engineers I know that could make a difference in this person's goal? To me, that's recruiting. Recruiting is super humble work. This is actually like not a huge ambition. Like I just like to connect people and build community and find ways that can add value to other people's lives, whether they're the investor or they're the software engineer. So like my dreams, like my goals, they are small compared to like the venture scale, venture founder goal. So that's how I think about it. There's a lot there to unpack that I'm sure we could jam on more, but it just really comes down to where do we put the focus on? And I think it belongs with the candidate.
Yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. I mean, recruiting is, I mean, it's a noble calling because, I mean, it's the engine that, you're putting talent together, and without the talent, the rest of this doesn't go. I mean, there's a certain, I think a fundamental thing about it. A lot of the software engineers that I've been talking to lately have sort of been rebelling against what they frame as like kind of the grind mindset that, there's definitely those engineers out there who, as you said, they want to do like the 120 hours a week. They want to lock down the most mega compensation they can. They want their equity. I mean, they're very sort of driven, and a lot of them do tend to be younger. And then you talk to engineers. I was actually just talking to somebody who works in the university system at the University of Kentucky, where sometimes you do want to balance things out and you want that work life balance, and you're willing to take pay that's, maybe not what you'd be getting at a Google in order to, yeah, like walk out the door at 5 p.m. every day and have dinner with your kids. I mean, so it's the understand. It feels like that recruiters and hiring managers are under such pressure to hire and hire quickly and so on, that to be able to find out what an engineer wants, like what their goals are, like how they're feeling, like how they see their careers. Seems like they're operating under pressure, like the pressure to hire as quickly as possible, and then also the pressure to find this out and get the right candidate and make sure that they align. And I'm not sure. I mean, for every recruiter, I'm sure it's very different how they kind of approach that dichotomy or solving that equation. Yeah, I don't. I mean,
It's interesting for sure, and we've talked a little bit about Google today on this call and like competing for the creature comforts of working at a cush environment. The reality is like I think historically we've thought like, oh yeah, like big tech, like everybody's like your job is safe, it's security. But like what we saw through the post ZERP landscape is that like there were layoffs at big tech. Um, so like no one's safe. And I think what I hear from a lot of candidates is they want to diversify their income streams while also living a life that aligns with their goals. And again, it's back to that fluidity. So when I think about folks that work in startups or work in big tech or work outside of tech in the other 10 sectors of the S&P, being based in Colorado and growing up as a recruiter in Colorado has really shaped my outlook for the type of talent that I'm placing and have placed. If I'm recruiting in SF, I'll like be boots on the ground sometimes. Like I was working in Jackson Square, like the belly of the beast. The culture is just different. People live and breathe tech. Even your Uber driver has a startup that they want to pitch. In Colorado, it's different. We have a lot of that type A driven creator builder personality. And while we've seen a dip in the venture landscape here with a few funds shutting down, everybody here has these secondary high passion projects, whether it's art, or what have you. But the predominant one I've seen, which is a reflection of my bias, is their passion for the outdoors. Like you don't live in Colorado if you're not like a baller skier, mountain biker, runner, whatever. So here the culture is like come in, hustle 8 to 5 and then like be on the mountain from, 5 to 9 p.m. sundown. And I think that balance has really been healthy for me as I navigate my own understanding and my own role in tech. Like, I'm just a dude in my basement connecting people to great opportunities. This is one of the oldest professions in the history of humanity. You need like a caveman to push a boulder up a hill. Like, okay, cool. There's probably some guy in a cave over that knows a guy that knows a guy. That's recruiting. So, from a first principles thinking, it really just comes down to dot connecting and understanding who can do what when, why, where, and how. Um, if we can solve from there, we can have some fun. Life life is far too short not to have fun working on cool problems with interesting people. And like to me, recruiting is about finding those interesting people.
Mm. Yeah. The cool thing about Colorado, Dice is based in Colorado. So like whenever I'm talking to colleagues or else me and colleagues are talking to technology pros, it always ends up being a conversation about trailheads, like where people hike last. Like, and I love that. I mean, I'm in, New York. I think, I mean, there's a lot of people who are also kind of very sporty and outdoorsy and so on. But Colorado is a whole different cut, which I think is amazing. I mean, it's as a avid mountain biker myself. I mean, it's really, yeah.
One of the things you said intentionally, you mentioned the word specialized talent. There's this conversation around tech, which is always like, should you be a specialist or a generalist? And historically, we've had like these T-shaped skill sets, which are kind of like specialists, where like you can go deep on a certain area. But again, it goes back to moving upstream and thinking with a wider aperture. Some of the biggest innovative companies in our humanity were companies like IBM or GE, where they were building the technology from scratch, hardware, software. They would hire people in, teach them how to use their tools, and then they would grow. That is no longer the case. So when we think about talent, I think about like engineers, like, yes, they might be a great Python developer. But if you were to run an audit of all of the technology stacks within tech companies, you would see that like right now an overwhelming technology of the skills that are being looked for include Python. That wasn't the case 30, 40, 50 years ago. Companies developed technology to train people, and that built a moat and kept talent retained. Now, what we see is the skills and the competencies and the technologies and the frameworks and the libraries and everything within the engineering ecosystem is more broad and can be applied to a variety of different companies. So, when it comes to being like a specialist or a generalist, I actually think it's important to be developing a pie shaped or a comb shaped skill set. I've seen a lot of engineering job descriptions that are like looking for an engineer who can design, and that goes into non-engineering hiring as well. And I've actually got a CSV that like maps some of these skill sets just because I find it fascinating. Um, just a natural part of the conversations I'm having with folks that reach out to me, friends, family, former placements, where like, hey, how do I continue to develop skills so that I can be relevant in the market? At the end of the day, like that's what this is all about. Like it's about having relevant skills that a company will pay for. They rent our brain power and we deliver value. It's hard sometimes for candidates, especially those who have come from like elite schools, who have leaned on elite brands and associations and these feedback loops they've developed as exceptionally smart people from a young formative age. If you can separate your ego and yourself from your skills that are valued in the market, that's how you can really align your impact. But that's so hard to do, especially if you've been told you're special your whole life. But then the market has these highs and lows. We're coming out of a landscape where we hit a high watermark on comp. And like, yeah, you might not get this huge pay bump or an advancement signal or a senior on your title in your next role as a result of the market dynamics.
That's a really fascinating point in terms of, I mean, it's all fascinating. And the part that also really sticks to me is when I talk to software developers, at least when they talk about sort of the essential skills, I mean, it comes down, a lot of their jobs come down to seemingly like Python and then a handful of open source platforms, and then that's sort of interchangeable between roles. And then they get really angry when they go to a new company and like God forbid, like something is like just build like some web asset or something that's built completely on Perl or something like that, and then like kind of the freak out begins, because it's not an interchangeable skill that plugs into so many companies that they've been bouncing around on. So it's an obvious point, but I just never really thought of it that way. So that's really fascinating.
I worked for a private equity software company, and the legacy code base was built in Cold Fusion. And so we had like early career software engineers um, that like hadn't even heard of it. And I think the last like update on Cold Fusion was like in 2013. Um, so there's always going to be somewhere in some pocket and in some corner of the world that may know how to use the tool. And I think that's what excites me about a recruiter is like, how do I find that person that knows how to like solve something in Cold Fusion that can help uh, solve a problem? And it doesn't necessarily have to be W-2 employment. I think we talk a lot about companies hiring and developing and retaining the best talent. It's like, well, if it's truly the best, like what are we scaling that on? Like how do we grade against the curve? The best talent, really? Like I think the best talent has probably built some sort of moat around their skill set where they don't need to work for any company W-2. So it's really measuring how we communicate. And it goes back to the brand piece of authenticity, being a little bit more discerning, being more intentional with our word. And if it's like, yo, do you want to come in and ship code for 15 hours a week at X amount a month and help us ship and build this thing? Like, sweet. Or it's like, hey, do you want a W-2 job and you want to come in and manage a group, develop other engineers, pass the torch? It just really comes down to how we get creative as recruiters and inform the businesses that we serve. Gone are the days of every role is W-2 with a little bit of equity. Um, I think things are going to get more interesting for recruiting, and we're already starting to see that.
Yeah. I know, for example, I know a guy. He's a COBOL expert, and he's a contractor, and he never wants to be a W-2 position. He's a great guy. He never wants to be a W-2, but like he can make enormous amounts of money with, being. He's young, but he realized early on that the number of people who have mastered this mainframe language are rapidly dwindling. So he works however many months, and then I was talking to him the other day, and he was saying that he was between contracts, and he didn't really even seem that pressure to get a new one, because he knows that there's like certain banks, governments, these people who are still using COBOL and mainframe, that'll always need his services, which are extraordinarily expensive. So yeah, no, I think for the people out there who have that sort of mastery,
And
you
we
know
all have those stories. That's what makes it so exciting. It's like, as you're sharing this, I'm like, oh, yeah, the best Python developer I know spends half the year in his conversion van mountain biking and he ships code 3 hours a day. And he's a PhD exited founder with patents. It's like somebody needs that skill set, but you're not gonna hire him. He's not gonna go work in your, like, stupid office for 600K. And yes, that sounds crazy to say, but, like, if you need somebody, if you need that talent, like, hit me up. I'll give him a call. There's this guy that I know in Durango, who's the best Android developer out there. Um, Android mobile developers are kinda tough to come by. This guy worked at Napster, so it's like he's been around forever. You're not gonna hire him W-2, but if you need a great mobile app for Android, hit me up. I'll hit them up. If you talk to a lot of people, you connect these dots, and like a lot of us in tech are only like 1 or 2 degrees of separation from some of these folks that have built things, like the guy who built the back end of the news feed at Facebook in
that's cool.
2013.
Yeah.
Got him on speed dial, but it's like you only know these folks if you talk to them. And that's what's so fun about talking to engineers is they're usually pretty humble folks, and they don't think of these like major uh, milestones as identity. The cool thing about talking to some of these engineering folks that have had these massive products that they've shipped is they don't really tie their identity to it in a way that broadcasts it all the time. Like I was talking to the guy that built the iOS app for Spotify, and like he's launching a new product, and like that stuff's really exciting. But like if you talk to these people and learn about their projects, you can pattern match. And then when you talk to like a venture studio that's building something, it's like, oh, they need this person because they did that. They already solved this. They can apply this with a new front end, and it's the same product. So they can build that faster and go to market. That's the value of recruiting.
No, it's fantastic. And it's lovely to think that there's all these people out there who, yeah, they're not part of grind culture. They don't want to be in office. They're living their best lives, and they get to kind of build all this cool stuff. That I mean, I use the Spotify app. I have to feel like 10 hours a day or something like that, which is
Yeah.
really amazing. So last question, and this is another broad one, but it's what are the biggest challenge? And we've touched on some of these points kind of throughout this conversation, but as we go into this year, what do you think the biggest challenges are facing the recruiting industry? Is it still making sure that you keep up with these conversations with people? Is it automation? I mean, what do you think, if you're a recruiter, what's sort of keeping you up a couple hours at night every night as you stare at the ceiling?
The biggest thing for recruiters in 2025 is going to be identifying signal through noise. There is a lot of noise around AI, around vendor tooling. There's a lot of noise around inbound applications. So, as recruiters, we have to get laser focused on defining signal through noise, being able to own your day, attack your day, understand your calendar, understand that when somebody's hitting you up, especially if it's a vendor that wants to show you their new AI tool, like when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. I think it's easy for recruiters to get distracted. And as an industry, recruiting kind of has shiny object syndrome. Focus on the fundamentals, like fill your pipelines, reverse engineer those pass through rates to understand historically like what candidates you need, and then drill down on those skill sets. Like still make time for that sourcing work despite the mass volume of inbound applications. Maybe that's not the case where you're working. Maybe you don't have this massive inbound problem. I think that's very real too. Understand what works for you, for your hiring managers, get laser focused on building the craft and have fun. Like, don't stop having fun. If you're not having fun in recruiting, like, go do something else. Um, I'm excited by that. But yeah, I think 2025 is all about um, discernment, mastering our own time, mastering our own domain, and being able to say yes to things that deliver value for our clients.
Cool.
The
I think,
technology will catch up.
oh, yeah.
I think one of the pieces around LLMs is that like 6 months from now, we're going to look back and like all the things that we were wasting our time today thinking about or trying to solve for will be solved. That is what the last 2 years of chasing AI knowledge has shown me. It's been fun to stay in the loop and be able to have those kind of conversations over coffee with other folks about like what's going down. But at the end of the day, like recruiting as a process hasn't changed in the last 2 years significantly. And if I think about, okay, I've got 10 or 12 hours in my day, how do I want to maximize that? Do I want to spend, another hour putting together some knowledge understanding of an AI tool, or do I want to like go touch grass and get a workout in or go say hi to my neighbor? I think what I'm craving a little bit and something I've heard from other recruiters is that in-person community building is very fruitful for how we move forward with Unity. So I'm excited to like get out more into the community this year in 2025, see some friends at conference, and build here in Denver where I'm based. So stay tuned for some more stuff. And I'm really excited to build at TLDR. My day job is recruiting and building the people and talent function for one of the largest tech newsletters in the world. We are hiring in our go to market group, and we're excited. We have 5 million subscribers. I'm working Rex. I'm in the trenches. I got screens coming up after this. So don't stop recruiting and always be sourcing.
Well, that was fascinating. Here's some quick takeaways from this talk with Brandon. First, embrace flexibility and adaptability. The tech landscape is constantly evolving, with new technologies and challenges emerging regularly. Recruiters must be prepared to adapt their strategies and approaches to navigate these changes effectively. This includes being open to new recruiting methods, technologies, and approaches to attract and engage top talent. Second, prioritize the human element. While technology can streamline many aspects of the hiring process, it's crucial to maintain a human centric approach. Focus on building strong relationships with candidates, providing a positive and personalized experience, and ensuring that the human element remains central to the decision making process. Third, understand and address candidate motivations. In today's competitive market, attracting and retaining top talent requires a deep understanding of candidate motivations. Go beyond traditional compensation and benefits to discover factors like company culture, values, work life balance, and opportunities for growth and development. Tailor your recruiting efforts to appeal to the specific needs and preferences of your target candidates. Fourth, focus on building strong relationships. Cultivate strong relationships with potential candidates, both actively and passively. This includes building a strong professional network, attending industry events, and engaging with candidates on platforms like LinkedIn and Dice. Focus on building long-term relationships with potential candidates, even if they are not currently seeking a new role. We covered a lot more during the discussion, so please give it another listen if you missed anything. We'll see you next time, and remember, Dice is your best resource to find the tech talent you need to fill your open roles, and for tech professionals, the best place to grow your tech career.